modified by one of my colleagues, Anne Labasse, from an Italian Sicilian folk tale. And as Mick says, never let theology get in the way of a good tale. There was once an innkeeper in Galilee, and he was the meanest innkeeper you were ever likely to meet. There were no free little pots of peanuts on the bar in his inn. Anything you wanted you had to pay for, even a glass of cold water. The innkeeper had started to hear stories about a travelling preacher and teacher from the neighbouring town of Nazareth. This man, Jesus, spoke about the generosity of God, how he gave life in all its fullness to anyone who wanted it, free of charge, overflowing. At first, the innkeeper was very sceptical. He heard how Jesus had given 5,000 people a free meal of loaves and fishes. What was that all about? Jesus had missed a trick there. He could have made a fortune. But for all his disapproval, this preacher's message stirred something deep in the innkeeper's heart. In the small hours of the night, he would find himself wondering what the world would be like if everyone lived this sort of generosity, and thinking that it just might be rather good. It was as if a little doorway had opened up in his heart, just a chink, but enough to let some light in. One morning, the innkeeper heard that Jesus and his disciples were on their way into his village, and he thought to himself, perhaps, just perhaps, today I might try out this generosity the preacher talks about. Just for the day, mind. So he put a board outside his inn saying, "Free food and drink for all." Everyone in the village was astonished, and none more so than Thomas, when he arrived with Jesus and the rest of the disciples. Thomas knew this innkeeper from old, and he knew how mean he was. What could he possibly be up to? "I won't believe in this free food and drink," said Thomas, "until I see the plate full in front of me and drink the wine with my own mouth." But Jesus said nothing. He just went inside with the others. They sat down at the table, and sure enough, the innkeeper brought them food and drink. The best he had, and plenty of it. Jesus and the rest of the disciples tucked in and enjoyed it. But Thomas ate suspiciously, still convinced there must be a catch somewhere. At the end of the meal, he sidled up to the innkeeper. "I don't know what you're up to," he said, "but I don't believe for 1 minute that you intend us all to eat for free. This is not in your nature. You must want something from Jesus in return. It just wouldn't be like you not to." The innkeeper was hurt. Just for once, he had wanted to be generous, to try out this way of generosity, this way of life Jesus talked about. And he had enjoyed seeing Jesus and his friends eat their meals. He had enjoyed the feeling that he was helping them. But it seemed that even Jesus' own disciples didn't really believe this generosity Jesus talked about. If Thomas couldn't believe that he could change and be different. So that little doorway in the innkeeper's heart slammed shut. "Well, if that's what you think, I suppose it must be so," he said to Thomas. And he went over to Jesus and he said to him, "Your friend over there thinks I must ask you for something in return for your meals. So Jesus, I'd like to ask you a favour." "Well, I would have given it to you anyway," said Jesus, "but ask away." "I have a fine fig tree outside the inn, but I never get any figs on it, because as soon as they ripen, the village children come and climb the tree and steal them. I want you to curse the fig tree, so that anyone who touches it sticks fast to it until I tell them they can go." So Jesus did what he asked, and went on his way with Thomas and the rest of the disciples. The next day, when the children came to raid the fig tree, they found that as soon as they put their hands on it, they were stuck fast, just as the innkeeper had asked. They couldn't get free no matter what they did, twisting and turning, until he gave the word. The message soon got around, and after that no one dared try to steal the figs, which was just as well, because the innkeeper, having tried that generosity business once, wasn't going to try it again. He went right back to his old ways. No one was getting anything free from him again. Years passed. Jesus was crucified and his friends scattered, but the innkeeper just went on as before. In time, the fig tree grew old and died a natural death. But so that he wouldn't lose it completely, the innkeeper had its wood made into a little wooden bottle, which he kept his best wine in. Eventually, the innkeeper grew old too, and one day Death came knocking at his door. "Come along with me, old man," said Death. "You've had your time." Now the innkeeper thought fast. He had no intention of giving his life up so easily. He didn't give anything else away, so why should he give away the most important thing? "Oh, of course I'll come with you," he said to Death. "But before I do, I'd like to have just one last drink of my finest wine. Come along in for a minute while I fetch a glass. Perhaps you'd like some too." Well, Death came in and sat down at the table, while the innkeeper fetched down the little bottle made out of the wood of the fig tree. "Well, the only thing is," said the innkeeper, "I know a little wasp flew into the bottle and drowned in there, but I haven't been able to get it out. I wonder whether you, being very clever, I'm sure you're able to shrink yourself and stretch yourself. Would you just mind shrinking down for a minute and popping in the bottle to fetch out the wasp for me?" Death thought this was a very odd request, but he couldn't see what the problem might be, so he did as the innkeeper asked. But of course, having got into the bottle, he couldn't get out again, because the wood of that fig tree still had the power to make anyone who touched it stuck fast, even Death. So the innkeeper put the stopper back in the bottle, quick as you like, and there was Death stuck. And if Death was stuck, no one could die. Now this might sound like a good thing. The innkeeper thought it was anyway. Actually, it wasn't so simple. Without Death, people started living on, even if they were very ill, even if they didn't really want to and had been looking forward to being with God in heaven. After a while, the world was full of people who were really ready to die, but couldn't. Well, up in heaven, St. Peter was starting to get worried. No one was coming to the pearly gates at all. He went and spoke to God about it, and God decided he'd better get this sorted out. So he sent the archangel Michael down to see the innkeeper to ask him to let Death go. Well, the innkeeper could see by this stage that there was indeed a bit of a problem, but he wasn't going to let go without a struggle. "If I let Death out of the bottle, I'll know I'll be one of those he wants to take along with him, and I'm a little worried about that. What if God doesn't let me into paradise? What if he decides that I've been too mean to deserve a place?" "It won't be so," says Archangel Michael. "God's far more generous than we can ask or imagine. But if you want a promise, then God has given me authority to give it to you." So the innkeeper let Death out of the bottle and promptly died. Up went the innkeeper to the gates of heaven, in a great crowd of people, all of whom had been waiting to die. It was so busy at the pearly gates that St. Peter couldn't keep up with the rush, so he asked St. Thomas to come and give him a hand. And that is how it came to be that the innkeeper found himself once again face to face with Thomas. Thomas looked him up and down and said, "You? Surely you can't think you could come in here to heaven. Not after the life you've lived and all the trouble you've caused." Well, the innkeeper said he had been promised entry by the archangel. Thomas wouldn't believe it. So he went himself to speak to God. Can it really be true you would let a mean man like that innkeeper into paradise? A man who's never given away anything in his life? Now, Thomas, actually, that isn't quite true, is it? Said God. There was that day when he fed my son and all of you for nothing. Yes, but he wasn't really being generous. He was up to something. I knew it. I just couldn't work out what it was. And look, he went straight back to being mean afterwards. Anyway, look at all the trouble he's caused. But God looked Thomas in the eye. No, Thomas, it is you who caused the trouble. Because you couldn't believe the innkeeper could change. Because you couldn't be generous in spirit to him and give him the chance he needed. The door in his heart slammed shut, and the little bit of light he'd seen and might have shared was snuffed out. Perhaps, before you accuse someone else of being ungenerous, you might look at yourself first. And God went to the gates of heaven and welcomed the innkeeper himself into paradise, where there is life and love freely given in abundance to all who want it. Like I say, we do have some strange theology there, but never let that get in the way of a good story.